happy to have all of you here, dear panelists, and also all of you who are attending the event today. So we're here today to talk about next generation blockchains, right? So I suppose all of us here know about Bitcoin. Who here has heard of Bitcoin? Okay. Who here thinks you are confident in explaining in a basic way how Bitcoin works? So the basic concepts of blockchain. Yeah. Maybe we can give somebody a try. Would you like to give it a shot? Dear sir, in front.
Blockchain essentially is a glorified database actually.
Someone like a second try? Sam, I saw you raise your hand. Okay.
I'll just add, it is a database, and but it goes through a slightly different process where you have people confirming, and once a transaction or an event is confirmed, it's can't be changed. It's recorded immutably.
Thank you, Sam. It was enlightening. So today, we're not going to talk about the basics, right? So we're going to assume some of it's common knowledge. I think we'll cover some of these basic principles as we go along as well. But today we're here to discuss next generation blockchains. Before much of the world has even known about the basics or the details of the Bitcoin blockchain, we've actually innovated much further than that. And we've come up with different iterations and even different types of blockchains which may not have blocks, or you may break it into different parts, or you may have different consensus mechanisms. Yeah. So I'd like to pass it straight to our panelists to start off with our first question, which is what is your blockchain journey to date, and what attracted you to your current project? Maybe we start with Calvin.
Hi, nice to have everybody here today. I started learning about Bitcoin and blockchain when I was still with SG Innovate, right? That was my previous employment. And I discovered that it was a very interesting technology. I was doing more data stuff at that point in time, and I started diving deeper into it and experimented with running an Ethereum node. So for those who are more familiar, you would know that Bitcoin blockchain is the big brother of all blockchains, and Ethereum come after that, providing an extra way for you to run a program on top of that. So Bitcoin allows you to transfer value to each other, right? So you can arguably send one Bitcoin in Singapore to someone else in London or someone else in India, right? By just doing a global transfer without passing through any traditional financial system. So that's what made blockchain very interesting at first. And when Vitalik Buterin came up with the concept of smart contracts and Ethereum, that made it even more interesting, because now not only can you transfer value manually, you can also write the program and make such value transfer automated, contingent on certain conditions. Right, so that's what I would call the traditional blockchains. So that's how I got started and how I got intrigued with it. And I had a lot of spare Amazon credits and used that to run Ethereum nodes and earn some money from there. So it was cool.
Hang on, so what attracted you to Hashgraph? So how do you get involved?
Oh, that's an even longer story, but I'll keep it short. So when I jump into a particular technology framework, I've been a programmer for over 12 years, right? I've learned all sorts of programming framework, from iOS to Android to web framework to backend, Golang, the latest fancy one is called Rust, endless programming languages and endless framework that changes according to the fashion at that point in time. So I was very curious. I was like, cool. I've seen the pattern recurring again and again, right? You always start with something that is interesting, maybe like Java, that goes into PHP, that goes into something else, Python, Perl, blah, blah, blah. Right? So I was wondering to myself, okay, I've seen the pattern countless times. I've seen how iOS ecosystem matured. I've seen how the Android ecosystem matured. And I've seen how big data in its various forms have evolved. So I was extremely curious, like, okay, where's this blockchain thing going? Where is it going to that would make it a mature kind of technology that would have mainstream adoption and acceptance? So I dug further and further and realized that, there are people who have come up with interesting directed acyclic graph type ledgers, right? And they call them public ledgers. So, okay. And then one fine day, I came across a newsletter that said, hey, this particular professor in Dallas, US, solved a fundamentally 30-year plus distributed systems problem, and he calls his algorithm Hashgraph. So that caught my attention immediately. It was like distributed systems is essentially blockchain, right? It's Bitcoin, it is Ethereum, it's all the third generation type ledgers that are trying to solve it through different consensus algorithms. So who is this professor who claimed that he has solved a fundamentally difficult computer science problem that has been around for 30 plus years?
Should we leave it there as a bit of a teaser? Who is it? Find out soon.
And that's Professor Lehman Bart. He is the founder of Hedera Hashgraph. So Hashgraph was first being used by credit unions in North America in a private permission setting, right? It's a private blockchain. Well, private ledger. It's not a blockchain at all. And right now, we have finally developed it. I joined the team. By chance, Hedera decided to appoint a head of Asia in Singapore, and they did so. And when I was working for SG Innovate, I invited him to give a talk. That completely caught my attention and resulted in me leaving my job in SG Innovate and joining Hedera Hashgraph. So that's the interesting journey I've taken so far.
Thank you, Kelvin. Stephen?
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen. I'm the founder of Taraxa. I just want to quickly say that it's really an honor to be up on the stage along with such an illustrious panel. So thanks. So my journey into blockchain has been sort of long and sort of windy, right? So I've told people that I've had 3 of my Stanford classmates told me about blockchain once every 2 years, right? So I heard about Bitcoin from Bobby Lee, founder of Bitcoin China. He was telling us, buy Bitcoin. I bought a little Bitcoin, it went down, whatever. And then I heard about blockchain from Alex Liu, founder of MyCoin Taiwan, and I checked out a few meetups, met with Alec a few times, but everyone was talking about consortium chains and private chains. So I didn't think that was intellectually stimulating, so sort of ignored that again. And then 2017 again, another friend of mine, a classmate of mine, Jianbo Wang, he told me, he suddenly quit his job as a trader on Wall Street and joined a blockchain startup, created a decentralized exchange. So I figure, anything in the world, right? If 3 very smart people told you about the same thing, 3 times, then it's a pretty good sign that this is something you should really pay attention to, right? So the reason why I found blockchain so compelling was actually a result of my background. So I had founded 3 startups in China, and then I had done a lot of strategy consulting for large multinational companies. And one of the interesting things I realized very early on in my consulting career is that large corporations are planned economies, right? Any sort of large organization are planned economies. And we all learned in school, right, Economics 101, that planned economies are inherently inefficient because the people making the decisions have imperfect information. That's why you have market economies. But if you have, large corporations, 300,000 people, 15 layers of management, these executives, by definition, right, Economic 101 definition, they make incorrect decisions. It's not their fault. They just do, right? And working within these large corporations, trying to get them to understand that the pace of innovation has quickened, and that the same old method of managerial command and control centralized system doesn't really work, right? It was very, very difficult to convince people that this was something that there was a sufficient alternative. And then blockchain was really the only technology on the market today that enabled decentralized collaboration. I mean, that was something that really, really was attractive to me. And Taraxa, in general, we're focused on building trust within IoT devices for within machines. So why do we pick machines, right? So first of all, I was trained as an electrical engineer, so I like machines in general. Second of all, blockchain is really here to solve trust gaps, right? Now, what's interesting about human society is that over thousands of years, human society has actually developed very, very strong networks of trust mechanisms, right? It started out with families, right? Families, tribes with families survive better than those without. Then it went into, smaller organizations, governments, legal systems, corporations. These are all mechanisms that existed to ensure trust. So it's actually really difficult, right? Very, very difficult, as I'm sure everyone has realized by now, to find extremely viable applications for blockchain, because it's hard to argue, why is this decentralized trust system better than this current centralized trust system, right? Like Citibank never screwed me over, and I'm happy with them, right? So it's difficult to justify, right? But in the world of machines, there are no such trust mechanisms. And as the number of autonomous machines increase exponentially every single year, they need some way to actually coordinate with one another independently and more autonomously. So we think that actually, if blockchain were able to take root, I'm actually of the opinion that it would take root in the world of machines much earlier than it would take root in the world of humans, right? So that's how I got into blockchain, and that's why I started working on the current project. Thanks.
Thanks for sharing, Stephen. Yaoqi?
So I'm Yaoqi, right now the CTO and co-founder of Ziliqa. So I got to know the blockchain system when I was doing my PhD in 2014. So at that time, I was exploring the possibility of developing a privacy-preserving peer-to-peer web overlay for the entire internet architecture and system. And at that time, Loy was my lab mate. Right now, he's the CEO and also the founder of Kyber Network. So at that time, we discussed a lot how to utilize or leverage the blockchain system to really benefit the internet or this web system. And so basically, I spent like 2.5 years on studying all the different crypto and also the trusted hardware mechanism to enforce these privacy-preserving P2P web overlays. I explored this earning routing technology, homomorphic encryption, and also the oblivious RAM plus this Intel SGX, and all these state-of-art crypto primitives and also the trusted hardware solutions to sort of enforce the privacy-preserving primitives on the peer-to-peer web overlays. And finally, I published a bunch of papers on this topic. And at that time, I thought I already partially solved these issues, sort of to decentralize the web in a privacy-preserving manner. And after that, I discussed more on how to incentivize the nodes or the peers in this P2P network, especially for the privacy-preserving nodes, because they have to spend a lot of computation power and also storage to enforce this new feature. And then during some discussions with Loy, we figured out maybe we can leverage the blockchain. And then it was already in 2016 and 17. And then I studied a lot of these consensus protocols in this traditional and classic distributed system, from the PBFT, all these Byzantine fault tolerance protocols. In the distributed system, actually, it was a super old topic. It was proposed 30 years ago with this very classic paper, Byzantine general problem. And there are a bunch of papers, but to be honest, after 30 years, we still couldn't solve this consensus protocol in a very large-scale system. For the PBFT, at most we can have like 15 nodes in the system. And then we sort of see the beauty of Bitcoin and Ethereum system, because in this system we can easily have over 10,000 nodes or 20,000 nodes in the system. At the same time, we can still achieve the agreement across all the nodes on the dedicated block. And then we figure out the blockchain can really help to decentralize the web in an incentivized manner. And after that, we collaborated and co-founded Zilliqa and tried to convert one of the papers called basically to apply the sharding technology on the public blockchain space in 2017. So together with Perdik, my advisor, and also my senior Shinshu Amrit, so we together founded Zilliqa to really push this sharding technology to this industry. And after these 2 years development and 2 years development, basically this year January we launched our mainnet. As we can see, so it's the first blockchain system really use the sharding technology in the industry. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Yaoqi. And thank you for the wait, Diego. It is now your turn to shine. Yes.
Hello, Diego speaking. So my specialty actually has nothing to do with blockchain. It is supply chain management and logistics. And back in 2014, Arthur Brightman, the founder of the Tezos project, asked me some advice about smart contracts, what we call today smart contracts, and how those smart contracts could be applied to business, how to make those smart contracts secure. And that time in 2014, well, I gave him advice on how some elements in Tezos could be implemented. And after that, when the Tezos Foundation was going to be created in 2016, Arthur Brightman thought that it would be good to have in the board of the foundation someone with knowledge of business and science and contract automation and those kind of things. So he asked me to be part of the board, the three-member board of the Tezos Foundation. So I was a founder member of the Tezos Foundation, not the Tezos project, but Tezos Foundation. And ever since I have been advising different teams in Tezos, different organizations in Tezos about scientific aspects of smart contracts, formal verification, what we call that today, and also how to use that in B2B commerce, B2C, all the more business side of it.
Right, thank you. Okay, I need to move you a bit so you can see me as well. So, jumping right into it, after quite a lengthy introduction, let's get into what exactly is the innovation that your project is bringing to the blockchain space. So from the technology standpoint, what is the difference and what major advantage does it give beyond the original Bitcoin blockchain, right? So let's start from the other way, from Diego. I hope you managed to hear the question.
I understood the question. I can
Yes.
answer. So the Tezos was written from scratch with a particular emphasis on security and sustainability. Okay, security is the fact that the existing blockchains have problems that have been losing funds, large amount of funds, and that is something that is bad for business. We're going to have a lot of trouble to convince any business that the future of whatever, finance, B2B, e-commerce, is this system, whatever it is, that keeps leaking money all the time. Okay, so security is very important for businesses. And the other problem is sustainability, which is that businesses are not going to be attracted to a platform that is likely to disappear in a couple of years. Okay, so they want to make sure that all the investments that are going to do in this system are going to remain there for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And those are basically the focuses of Tezos: security and sustainability. And based on that focus, then after that, Tezos, Archer Brightman made technical decisions. Those technical decisions go from using the POS type of blockchain into designing specific algorithms for that, into having a system that can be upgraded on the fly. So Tezos can be upgraded to include any type of new technology without stopping the system, without having to, to stop the system. And these upgrades are done by vote to avoid having a community that breaks down because of technical issues. Okay? But globally speaking, the innovation of Tezos is to say, if we want to be here in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, if we want businesses to start building on top of our system, we need to have a system that is secure and that is built to last for many years.
Thank you, Diego. I'd like to zoom in a little bit on what you said just now on POS and maybe share a little bit more about that. So would you like to give a quick introduction of POS and why you chose it over proof of work, for example, in your emphasis for security?
Okay, so all blockchains need to have something at stake. What something at stake means is that someone has to lose something if they don't behave properly. Okay, there has to be a punishment. This punishment is some kind of investment. You have to lose some kind of investment. Okay, you can put that investment can be under multiple ways. In proof of work, what we say is you have to buy these computers, very big amount of computers. You have to spend a lot of money in electricity, and if you misbehaved, then all that money that you put into computers and electricity is lost. Okay, that's the stake. That's the punishment that you get for trying to hack the system. In proof of stake, the idea is that instead of asking for a investment or for a down payment for a collateral in electricity, we're going to ask for a collateral in terms of money that is basically frozen. Okay, we're going to say you need to put in this bank account, in this Tezos bank account, a certain amount of money. If you try to hack the system, we're going to remove it. Okay, that is proof of stake. Okay, in both cases you have a collateral, but in proof of work, this collateral basically is electricity consumed. In proof of stake, that collateral is money frozen. Okay? And the reason why proof of stake is considered more sustainable is basically because you're not wasting electricity. Okay? The algorithms that were done there were done in such a way that you're losing an opportunity cost of what you would have done in that money instead of burning electricity.
Right, so it was chosen based on the sustainability factor.
Yes.
I see. Okay, great. Thank you, Diego. Jumping straight to Yaoqi, so there was some criticism on proof of work, but I understand that Ziliqa is using proof of work with a combination of sharding right now. So would you have an answer to that? Why does Ziliqa choose to continue with proof of work? And maybe share a bit more about the innovation in terms of sharding as well.
Oh yeah, so the comments on the proof of stake or proof of work, right? For Ziliqa, basically the main contribution of our project is about the sharding. So either proof of work or proof of stake is just sort of a defense mechanism to be against these CPU attacks. The idea that suppose in the network, right, a lot of nodes in the network. So if we don't have proof of stake or proof of work, basically the malicious nodes can create as many identities as possible. and then later they can send arbitrary transactions, especially the malicious transactions. And once your network basically accepts the transaction into the blockchain, the distributed ledger, then you can see these double spend attacks. For Ziliqa, we choose proof of work as sort of the defense mechanism against these CPU attacks. Of course, in the future, we may also choose the proof of stake. But in our opinion, because right now, as you can see, Bitcoin already passed like 10 years, and the system is still quite stable. So in our opinion, basically proof of work is relatively mature and compared to proof of stake. So that's why we choose proof of work as this CPU defense. And talking about sharding, the concept is quite simple. It's basically divide and conquer. Suppose in the network we have like 10,000 nodes, right? In Zilliqa, we divide the 10,000 nodes into like 16 groups. Each group has like over 600 nodes. So this way, we can also divide all the transactions for this network into like 16 different groups. And for each group, all the nodes in that group can basically process the transactions in parallel. And later, they can run some consensus protocol, for example, this Byzantine tolerance protocol to agree on this same set of valid transactions. And finally, we have some algorithm to aggregate all the blocks proposed by different shards or the groups and aggregate into one block called final block. At Ziliqa, sort of we are one of these pioneer projects propose this sharding technology. We don't do state sharding, the one proposed by Ethereum, but we do network sharding, transaction sharding, and also smart contract sharding. We already released and published this mainnet. You can check our documentation and some other materials. The way we do the sharding is quite interesting. So basically, we also treat these smart contracts as a special transaction. But based on the sender address and also recipient address, we divide these smart contract transactions into a dedicated shard. So basically, we won't allow the same transaction to be sitting into different shards. So then we can prevent these conflicts across different shards. So there are a bunch of interesting ideas in our project to prevent some of the existing problems, maybe maybe sitting in this state sharding. At the same time, as you can see, we treat the security as top priority. That's why we have like over at least like 600 nodes in each shard. So this way we can guarantee with high probability, basically no shard can be compromised. Apart from sharding, actually at Zilliqa we also develop our own smart contract language called Ziliqa. The advantage of this Ziliqa contract language, right? So basically, once the developer develop some smart contract in Ziliqa, so later it's quite easy for the developers to use a formal verification tool called COC to write some formal proofs for the smart contract. This way, we can easily basically show some of the theorems or to prove some properties of the smart contract developer develop. I think that's sort of a huge advantage for this financial industry and the other traditional industries which really treat security as their top priority. Yeah.
Thank you, Yao-Qi. If I may clarify just a little bit, so I hear also a lot of emphasis on security. I think given the function of blockchains, and you can very much understand that, and with your own language as well to make it easily formally verified. I was wondering for the 600 nodes for each shard, how did you come to that number and how do you know that's truly secure?
Then we need to zoom into the protocol a bit. So basically, let's still get to the example. For example, we have 10,000 nodes in the network, right? For the 10,000 nodes, it's not easy for them to get into the network. They first need to do the proof of work, just similar to Ethereum. We use the Ethash, same as Ethereum. They need to achieve a target of this difficulty, and after that they can join this network. And after that, we based on the proof of work results submitted by each node, and then we generate some randomness based on the results, and then randomly assign the nodes into different shards. And each shard has 600 nodes. Basically, you can use some mathematics to calculate the probability. It's just like 1 over 1 million chances. So the shard can be sort of occupied by over 1/3 of the malicious nodes. So otherwise, every shard will be occupied like 2/3 of these nodes. Basically, they are honest. So that's why we can guarantee if we run the consensus protocol within one shard, so all the nodes can agree on the same set of valid transactions instead of some bad transactions with double spin attacks.
Right, understand. So you came up with the percentage that you want it to be as secure as 1 in a million chance, and you extrapolated that you need 600 nodes to get reached there.
Right.
So moving on to Stephen and Kelvin now. So we understand that both proof of stake and proof of work and both Tezos and Ziliqa operate on more, you could say, kind of traditional blockchain structure, right? Whereas Taraxa and Hashgraph are different. Would you like to elaborate? Yeah.
So Taraxa operates on a block DAG topology. So this topology was first proposed by a bunch of researchers, Zohar and all. These are the guys that wrote the three pretty famous papers, Ghost, Spectre, and then Phantom Ghost Stat, right? So, this topology actually allows multiple nodes on the network to simultaneously propose blocks, without sacrificing security. So they actually did a lot of very interesting research on that. So we actually achieve sort of horizontal concurrency, or I think similar effect, right, to sharding. Not state sharding, just state transition sharding, with the block DAG topology. However, we're not using proof of work. We're also using proof of stake for the same reason that Diego mentioned, is that we don't need that many proof. I mean, it's non-sustainable in the long term. And also, to be very honest, if everyone is paying attention, there aren't that many new proof of work blockchains coming out, because as soon as you come out, a miner from Bitcoin or Ethereum just comes over and take over your network, right? So this is why a lot of networks who actually originally proposed proof of work, by the time they launch your mainnet, is actually going with a hybrid proof of work and proof of stake, right, to prevent that kind of takeover. So Taraxa uses this block DAG topology to achieve what we call horizontal concurrency, but because we're not using proof of work, we have to figure out other ways to actually randomly select block proposers and actually minimize the amount of overlap between the blocks proposed by different people, right? Because if you can imagine, if there's no such limitations, then everyone on the network would be proposing blocks, and all their blocks would contain the exact same transactions. That is very wasteful, right? So we use a process called cryptographic sortition, where every node actually locally calculates whether or not they are eligible to propose a block, and which pending transactions in the queue, are they eligible to actually work on or to pack into each block. This is something that requires no coordination within the network, and once they publish their block, it's very easy to verify whether or not they have followed the same rules, right? So in addition to having a block DAG topology, we're also introducing rapid finalization, because most classic, blockchains, right, such as Bitcoin and Ethereum, gives you probabilistic finalization. You ask did my coin transaction go through? They're like, well, I'm 60% sure it went through. Ask me a minute later, I'm 70%. So that's okay, right, for some use cases, but we think that especially for smart contracts, where these contracts can actually have wide-ranging impact. I mean, they can at the same time impact hundreds of accounts if they need to. You need finalization, right? The contract needs to know, or the decentralized application needs to know that it's 100% finalized, right? So when they're branching their logic based on the previous state, they know that they're doing it on the right thing, right? So that's also what we're also introducing into the DAGs. So it's very, very fast finalization. A third innovation that we're working on, and this is actually, we're still working on it, is this idea of vertical concurrency. So not many projects, I think, today in the space are looking at how quickly transactions are being processed. And in fact, if it weren't for proof of work, most of these CPUs would sit around at like 30, 40% maybe load. They're not 100% loaded. So that means that there's sort of still a significant amount of room for you to take advantage of that CPU process. So we're introducing speculative concurrency into the way virtual machine executes transactions to fully take advantage of the fact that basically every single computer we have today, even the ones on IoT devices, have multiple cores, right? So these are some of the innovations that we're introducing to solve both, to make the network faster, divide up the work, as well as to make every single node faster.
Right. So if I can clarify a little bit, given from someone who's not deeply technical, I understand the bit on when you say finality, it's because I want my transactions to be confirmed. I know it's complete, right? And the third part on concurrency is because you'll make things go faster, more transactions can happen per second. On the first one, the block DAG topology, could you clarify a bit on why that is needed, or why we need that innovation?
Okay, so if you have a single chain topology, right? So if you have Bitcoin or Ethereum, you're actually running into some very hard trade-offs in terms of throughput, right? So let's say 5 transactions per second, that's too low. So let's increase the transaction per second. Well, there's some naive ways you can do it, right? So the first naive way to do it is, well, why don't we just put more transactions into the same block, make the block really, really, really big, right? Well, that sounds good, except really, really big blocks propagates very slowly through the network, right? And since single chain topologies only at any given moment only allows a single block to be appended to the end of the chain, then what you end up happening is that different nodes at any given moment would have very, very discrepant views of what the world looks like, right? So then different nodes will start betting incorrectly on the longest chain, resulting in a lot more waste, right? So you actually sacrifice security when you have very, very large blocks on a single chain topology. Well, okay, so large blocks, not good, right? Screw that, let's look at the other way. Well, what if we just have more blocks? Large blocks not great, let's have more smaller blocks, right? Is that good? Well, actually, it's also not good, because once again, you have single chain topology where you can only bet on one chain. You run into the same problem, right? So if everyone's generating tons of little blocks, then that just means that every time as a miner, I have to choose from a lot more blocks to bet on what the longest chain is. So once again, that's a higher probability of me making a mistake. Once again, a lot more forking and lower security, and you don't really get the speed gain. So in these sort of single chain topologies that you have in the context of Bitcoin and Ethereum, you can't win. You just can't win, right? You get hard throughput / security trade-offs. So the basic idea that these researchers from Israel they propose is that, well, why don't we have a more inclusive mining, right? So why don't we have a lot more people together so that everyone's block can be included, but at the same time we don't have to sacrifice security, right? So we took those ideas. And what we did was that we actually, in our block DAG topology, multiple people can propose blocks, and the ordering, and that's very, very key, right? So block DAG, or any kind of DAG, right? The problem that they have to solve, that single chain topologies don't have to solve, is ordering. Because in a single chain, there's no question about ordering. It's just, this one came before that one, very, very clear. In a DAG topology in which we have blocks that point to multiple parents, right? Then you have to solve ordering. So we actually use this ghost rule to embed an anchor chain into the block DAG to ensure that amongst multiple nodes there's a fast convergence on ordering. Sorry, that's a lot of nebulous details. We'll probably explain later in my presentation. But fundamentally, the reason why this is necessary is that we need to get over this hurdle of sort of just lose-lose, right? You just cannot get faster throughput. In a DAG topology, you can get a faster throughput without sacrificing security.
Right. So the idea, the core motivation is to make the blockchain faster while maintaining its security. So again, we're coming to security, and that a block DAG topology makes that easier because it's easier to agree on a single version of truth rather than making a block size bigger where everyone will have different versions, or making a lot of small blocks where it's also very difficult to agree on the next version of the truth.
Exactly.
Okay, fantastic. Kelvin.
Hi. So Hashgraph is unique because I think that it has fundamentally solved the 30-year-old problem that Yao Qi has mentioned. It is the solution for distributed systems. So let's take a step back. I will try not to go into the more complicated concepts. So if you consider a voting pool of 10%, right, and a particular transaction comes to this voting pool of 10%, how do you know that this 10%, which way are they voting? Right, one person can vote, yes, this transaction is valid. The other person can say, no, this transaction is not valid. So the traditional way that we do it is by a central voting station, right? Very simple. Collect the votes from everybody, put it in one central vote counting station, let the vote counting station count. If we have 6 persons that says yes, and 4 persons that say no, then yes, the transaction is valid. Now, why are we going into the trouble of creating, as one of our friends here say, a glorified database that has to be decentralized? Right? Why are we giving ourselves so much trouble? Why don't we just use the central single server and count the votes for us? Problem solved, right? The problem with using a single server is that this single server is your single point of failure. You just need someone to corrupt that single server, and essentially your votes can be manipulated in any way that the central player wants. We see that today in many centralized services, right? Centralized services that collect our data, and they essentially own everything about us and can do whatever they want with it, right? You can exert pressure on them through political measures, through regulation, but the fact remains that the single centralized player controls our data. So, the concept of decentralization becomes important, which is why people like Bitcoin, people like Ethereum, because it gives everyone a say, right? We are not subjected to one single server deciding our fate. So that brings us back to, okay, fine, we don't want to do a central voting system. So how are we going to count our votes to decide whether a transaction is valid or not? So the perfect way of doing so, the most pure way of doing so, which is the 30-year-old problem that Yao Qi has mentioned, is, well, I have 10 person, I'm one of the persons in that 10-person pool, I will collect votes from 9%. The next guy next to me will collect votes from another 9%, and so on and so forth. But every single person will collect votes from everybody. Right? That's the purest way of distributed system. Now, this is what we call ABFT. Right? It is the gold standard of achieving distributed consensus. If you don't want the central party way of counting vote, this is the perfect way to do so. Okay, that sounds simple enough. So why the heck did nobody do this? Right? Why are we doing things like proof of work where everybody has to spend energy and resources to compute in order to say that, I'm the one that should be the one that decides whether this transaction is valid or not. So why don't we just do that? Right? The perfect way of doing voting, decentralized voting. Well, the problem with doing this perfect way of decentralized voting is that it's going to take goddamn forever. Right? You have 10 person, you have to wait for 9 person. The next guy has to wait for 9 person, and so on and so forth. And I'm just talking about 10 person. What if you have 600 person, right? Like Ziliqa's node 600. You have to wait, everyone has to wait for everybody. So it is simply impractical to have this pure method of voting. So here comes Hashgraph, right? And why I quit my job as Innovate. Right, so here comes Hashgraph. Now, Dr. Lehman has fundamentally solved this problem. How does he do it? He does it by using something called gossip of gossips, virtual voting, and famous witness to decide when a round of voting is done. Let me go through it in simpler way. So, in my original description of 10 person, instead of me just waiting for the other party to tell me and the other party to tell me and so on and so forth, I know that after the next vote, the guy who is telling me information actually has 2 votes in his hand. Right? In round 1, everybody has only 1 vote. But in round 2, one of these guys, actually everybody, has 2 votes in their hand. So what we do is we get them, each person, to say, okay, don't be silly, don't just send me your vote, right? The next round, you will send me a summary of what you know, plus your own vote, to me. So that suddenly reduces the number of rounds significantly. This is what we call gossip of gossips. Right? It's actually a very, very elegant solution. It's like among 3 of us, right? If I gossip about one of my friends, right, I can summarize his gossip and tell you the summary. Right? Why should I tell you only my part and then wait for him to tell you his part? And then wait for another guy to tell you his part? That makes no sense whatever. So as the round progresses, each summary is being passed. So instead of taking forever to collect information, the summary that's passed on to each node randomly essentially can be back calculated. So I don't need to wait for 9 rounds or 90 rounds to get all the information. I just need to wait 3 or 4 rounds, 6 rounds, 7 rounds, and I'm done. So from a super slow process, you suddenly have a super fast process because you're collecting summaries, and each round you're collecting more information that is a summary. Think of it that way. Yeah? You don't have to wait for every single person in this room to tell me, right? I just need someone to summarize something for me, and so on and so forth. Every round it just gets faster. So that's gossip of gossips. Now, what is virtual voting? Virtual voting is from the perspective of the receiver, right? When I receive a summary, I need to be able to know that I can decouple the summary into its constituents. I will know that, that guy actually summarized from node 3 and 6. Or the other guy who sent me information actually summarized for nodes 4, 5, and 9. So I need to be able to back count. And this is done through a cryptographic process. It's a graph which is like a Merkle tree. If you do a bit of cryptography, I think I shouldn't delve into the technical details. You would be able to back calculate what happened, how everybody has voted without actually hearing from them. You just need the summary to know how they voted. And then the last component is this. How do you know when to stop? Do you wait for, in a scenario of 10 voters, do I stop on the 3rd round? Do I stop on the 6th round? Or do I stop on the 9th round? So the famous witness essentially is a mathematical method to calculate based on supermajority, right? In the context of a 5-voter, the supermajority is not 3, but 4. So if there are 5 voters, your supermajority based on maths is simply 4, not 3. And based on 4 rounds, you essentially will know that it's time to stop. You have enough information to know what everybody is saying. So once you apply these 3 principles, which is Lehman's discovery, after investigating many different distributed consensus algorithm, PBFT, you name it, he has gone through all the thinking, and he thought that this was a problem that he couldn't solve. He spent 11 years on this problem, right? Before Hashgraph even existed, he spent 11 years researching this problem, and he discovered that with these 3 principles, he could come up with the exact same outcome as if you were to do the pure distributed voting model that I first described. You do not need to wait for 9 other persons to tell you, the next guy wait for the 9 other persons to tell you, and so on and so forth. Just using this tree method, mathematically, you have the exact same outcome as the pure decentralized voting model. In other words, he has satisfied the trilemma of distributed systems with his method. So this is what we call the hash graph. And it is not he say, she say. This particular method of solving the decentralized voting method has actually been proved formally using something called COQ. So I admire Zilliqa's smart contract system a lot. It's an amazing smart contract system because they are also using COQ proof. Now, smart contract is a very dangerous two-edged thing. If you introduce a bug in your smart contract, you potentially lose a lot of money, a lot of resources. So the brilliance of Zilliqa's smart contract system is that they use functional programming methods and the formal proof COQ method to prove that a particular program does exactly what it says it does. And what I'm saying here is that the hash graph algorithm is exactly that. It is COQ proof. That's the gold standard for proving any algorithm does exactly what it says it does. And it's not just because we say Hashgraph has solved the distributed consensus problem that has bugged everybody for 30 years. It's because we actually have the programmatic and mathematical proof to show that this is the case. Now, that's great. But what does it mean, right? I mean, so what if I have an ABFT algorithm? It means nothing to the layperson unless there are real benefits. So what are some of these real benefits? One, it is extremely fast, right? As part of my work with Hedera, my colleague there, Serene, and myself, we built a series of applications on top of Hashgraph. We want to convince people that they should build business applications on top of Hedera Hashgraph, but we have to eat our own dog food. We have to do it ourselves first, right? So that's what we did. We built a series of micropayment applications on top of Hedera Hashgraph. And it is so fast that our application, our central backend application that communicates with Hashgraph actually became the bottleneck. And we had to scale it through load balancing, etc., etc. It is so fast that it is 100,000 TPS. Now, contrast this with Ethereum's 25 TPS. Contrast this with Bitcoin's 7 TPS. We are talking about 100K TPS. So that's super fast. You don't have to wait forever for your crypto kitty to arrive in your pocket, right? You say you want to buy a crypto kitty, you do it on Hashgraph, and it's done. Near instant finality, right? Extremely scalable. And take note, I'm saying all this 100K TPS before sharding. We haven't even talked about sharding. Now we will be applying the same sharding technology as most other blockchain frameworks does. And so every single shard of Hashgraph nodes will have the exact same ABFT property. In other words, Lehman has achieved what many thought is impossible. He has the best security possible for distributed system. He has an extremely fast throughput, 100K TPS. We tried it and we were like, oh my God, my own centralized application is slower. That doesn't make sense, right? Near instant finality. Each transaction gets finalized within 2 to 3 seconds, depending on how far your nodes are distributed. But that depends on the network latency, of course, right? Not the consensus mechanism itself.
Sorry, Kevin, can I ask you to wrap up very quickly?
Sorry, I get very excited when I talk about it. I just go nuts. So it has blown my mind, and after experiencing 1 year of working with Lehman, I realized that he has solved the problem, and essentially this is what we bring to the table.
Right. I actually thank you so much for also going through some of the principles in a very basic way and also covering the trilemma. That was going to be my next question for everyone on whether your design, do you believe that the trilemma exists and can it be solved through technology or mathematics? And I believe you had the answer to that. But I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to jump to the final question instead, right? So we all know that there are so many protocols out there right now. I think within the top 50, if you look at in terms of coin market cap, it's more than half of them are, sorry, more than half of them are actually public protocols. So where do you see this ending up, right? Are we gonna just all build on our own blockchains? Are we gonna join these blockchains together in some interoperability protocol? Or are we gonna see your particular protocol or one particular protocol dominate the rest? Or perhaps we'll see a few fragmented niches depending on their functionalities, focusing on different use cases. I'd like to hear your thoughts and also from your perspective of the protocol and project that you represent, what kind of niche or what perspective you would take in this world where most of assets are tokenized or on the blockchain. Maybe we'll start with Diego. I hope you heard the question.
I understood the question. So, Tezos always prefers decentralization and security over other trade-offs, and that's why it wants to be a blockchain that secures assets. Okay, and let me explain that with an example. If today I want to pay $10, I use cash, and it's instantaneous. If I want to pay $100, I use a credit card, takes a couple of seconds. If I want to pay $1,000, I use a bank wire. The system asks me to do two-level verification, takes 3 business days. And if I want to be absolutely secure, and I want to transfer $10,000, I use a bank check, okay, where the bank is going to guarantee that the funds are there. They're going to move it from my bank account to their bank account, and they're going to guarantee that that check always has provisions because it's not my bank account, it's in their bank account, and basically it's the funds of the bank, okay? So those are different levels of trades-off between amount of money that is secure, speed of transaction, okay? And what Tezos wants to be is the latest level. Tezos is happy to be a little bit slower than the other blockchains if in exchange it can be extremely secure, okay? And hold your assets in a very secure way, okay? Tezos wants to be the new Bitcoin in some sense, okay? We don't want to compete with high throughput blockchains or those type of things. We really want to be the blockchain that secures the important amounts of assets.
Right, got it. So you expect Tezos to occupy the niche of the most important and the most critical assets that will be in the future. Great. Yao, would you like to go next?
So I have some of my own opinions on this topic. So if we still follow the valuation model of the current public blockchains, especially we follow the valuation mechanism of Ethereum, the basic idea behind this model is that if more decentralized applications are running on top of the public blockchain, and then the value of the public blockchain is higher. If we still follow this model, then we can foresee that in the future, especially after like 2 to 5 years, basically for most of the public blockchains, they sort of run out of their raised fund. At that moment, right? So if more use cases or dApps are running on top of the public blockchain, and then these public blockchains will be the winners after like 3 to 5 years. Then for the next 3 to 5 years, basically most of the public blockchains and all, I think most of the protocols, for example, Ziliqa, we are trying to find what are the best dApps on top of Ziliqa or the other public blockchains. And if we can really figure out the sort of profitable business model for these dApps, and then they can really run on top of the public blockchains, basically, we can survive after 3 to 5 years, or some other public blockchain can also survive. And maybe later, for a dedicated protocol, for example, Tezos, there is a payment system on top of it. And then definitely the protocol can survive based on that dApp, right? And for Ziliqa, right now we are seeking for the collaborations with Mindshare, one of the biggest advertisement companies. And also we are seeking the opportunities with these security exchanges, HG exchanges. So basically we try to figure out whether we can tokenize some of the real assets in the industry. At the same time, we are also seeking for some opportunity in this gaming industry and also payment industries. If we can really figure out some really profitable use cases on top of Ziliqa, then I think Ziliqa can be one of these survivors after 3 to 5 years. But at the same time, as you can see, right, this year, one of the hot topic is about the interoperability. Basically, it's about the cross-chain service or these cross-chain protocols, Cosmos, Polkadot. Maybe in the future, even we couldn't figure out some profitable use cases on particular chain, but since we have multiple cross-chain services, together we can build this blockchain internet in the future. So we can together figure out some interesting dApps or use cases on this blockchain internet. And all of us can survive at that moment.
Right, so when blockchains become interoperable, as long as you can get certain dApps to build on you, you will survive, and we will see a multitude of different blockchains as long as they have applications that want to build on them.
Yeah, it's a little bit similar, but not exactly the same as the current internet. For example, we have this Google advertisement, also Facebook advertisement. At the same time, we have lots of these game mobile apps. They are in different space, but at the same time, they can benefit each other. So I think maybe that can be one of the future scenarios after 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I think I basically agree with Yaoqi said. I think that you know, it obviously doesn't make sense to put the entire world on a single chain, right? Nothing in the world scales like that. It just doesn't make any sense. You know, the blockchain's value, like Yaoqi said, is defined by the ecosystem. And ecosystems are defined by applications, right? So it's actually my expectation that going forward, there will be hundreds of millions and billions of blockchains, right? Then these little blockchains are all going to be highly specialized in their specific domain, right? Specific domain. There's no reason to believe that there's one single chain that, you know, sort of has everything on it. That once again, that doesn't scale and it doesn't make sense, right? If I'm running a convenience store, like why should the chain that I'm on be constantly sort of talking to a chain that runs on autonomous vehicles, for example? Maybe occasionally they'll talk to each other, but you know, they don't talk to each other that much to warrant them sharing the exact same state, right? So I fully expect that going forward there will be tons and tons of chains, all specialized in specific niche applications. Now, for public blockchain projects such as ours and such as everyone else's, once again, what Yaoqi said is exactly correct. We are going to be measured by how effective we are at serving the specific market niches that we're able to identify, right? Are we able to provide, are we able to design and adapt the underlying blockchain infrastructure to serve the specific needs of these applications and really, really specialize and you know, just offer a better customer experience. If we offer a good customer experience and we, you know, solve their problems, there's no reason why they should go out and switch chains or create their own chain, right? And if we fail at doing that, then of course, then it's their imperative to do whatever it is that they want, right? So that's really what it is. And since almost every single blockchain project, public ledger projects, are open source, and most of the teams in this space are very talented, I would expect that the technology would rapidly converge. We're already seeing that, right? Once again, there's really nothing new under the sun anymore, right? There's a lot of people are coming up with new protocols, but it's basically I think after 2019 you're not gonna really see, at least it doesn't seem to me, you're gonna see game-breaking technology anymore, and the entire space is gonna sort of switch from fundamental research. There's still gonna be research going on, obviously, but I think the entire space right now is really at a point where they need to prove they can come up with viable applications that justify the existence of blockchain itself, right?
So Stephen, right before that, what about from the perspective of Taraxa?
So from a perspective of Taraxa, we're very interested in any kind of applications that involve devices, right? So if you envision the future, right, and this is not going to happen today, this is something that happens in the future, where machines actually make economic decisions, such as I'm running out of batteries, so I'm going to charge with this guy, that's in the future, right? But what's more fundamental today, the problems that exist today are devices lack identities, and devices they lack trust in the data that they produce, right? These are two very fundamental problems. They're also devices in general are insecure, right? So I think for us, we're very interested in doing work that actually embeds our blockchain protocol into hardware, right? To actually provide devices with unique, and this is very important, decentralized identities, right? But right now, devices don't really directly interact with anyone. Devices go back to their server, right? And then you interact with that server, who is owned by some company, right? So devices don't interact with anyone else, like people interact with people, right? Through these servers. So in order for devices to interact with each other, you have to establish their identity. So we're in a process of creating, very decentralized certificate authorities that establishes device identities. We're also in the process of creating a framework that allows any IoT device to perform what's called data anchoring, right? Basically, it's a way for it to prove that the data it generates, whatever data it generates, has not been changed after it was published, and also definitely came from this identity that it says it came from, right? So these are very fundamental problems that we have to solve for devices in order for 10, 20 years later when devices start trading with each other. And today we have these problems to solve. And then these are not sort of abstract problems either, right? You actually run into a lot of business models, right, that actually depend on sensor-generated data, right? So you have, for example, public infrastructure operations, right? You have government regulators, you have the private operators, and then you have the banks, right, who are lending money to these operators to finance these projects. Well, all three of them are very interested in the sensor data generated on these projects. For example, on a bridge, how many cars are passing through the bridge? Well, that's collected by a variety of cameras and gates and toll collecting sensors. Is the bridge falling apart? Are there cracks on the bridge? Well, that's, there are tension sensors, right? And there are pressure sensors. Is the tunnel leaking water? There are moisture sensors. Well, it's really great to talk about, well, we have all these sensors collecting data. But, today, how do you know that data is real? How do you know they're even sensors, right? How do you know this is not just me on a laptop giving you some random numbers, right? It's very, very difficult to figure out. And that's exactly what a lot of these, players in these type of setups are worried about. The banks don't know where the data came from. The regulators don't know where the data came from. So if you had device identities and you had data anchoring, right? When you're reading, the reports generated from these sensors, you can be sure that, number one, the data actually came from the sensor under this bridge, right? It actually came from it because there's a signature on it, right? And you know exactly what that signature means because the manufacturer has established a decentralized certificate authority that actually established that this is a torsion sensor or tension sensor, for example. And then afterwards, when it hashes the data that it uploaded, it hasn't been changed, right, after it's uploaded the data, right? Right today, right, in our human device interface world, we still run into problems where we don't fundamentally trust devices. Think about it, right? You don't trust any device, really. you actually trust the owner of that device or the manufacturer of that device. There's no reason for us to trust any device because they're dummies. They do whatever someone tells them to do, right? So I think these are the issues that we're focused on. And, you know, whenever you touch hardware, things tend to take longer. But I think this is a very interesting problem to tackle.
Thank you, Stephen. And Calvin, can we just ask you to wrap up very quickly in just a couple of minutes?
All right, I'll keep it short. I think that there will be very interesting interoperability protocols that are being explored. Atomic swaps are happening. And integration with private ledgers or private blockchains will be a thing because most companies do not need the use case of a public ledger. So lots of integration with private blockchain, with centralized systems across blockchain will happen.
And where will Hashgraph be?
I don't know. We'll do our best to support everybody. Yeah.
Be everywhere.
I think it's too early to say because it really depends on your business use cases. Most people don't care about the protocol. They care about the benefits the protocol gives them and the business use cases that you're building on it. So that's the most important thing. Like, I think they mentioned that you must support your customer, and I think that's totally needed in this space.
Thank you, Calvin. And I think that's a very great note to end on. Bringing back the focus back to the use cases. We talked about communities and DApps and finding actual reasons why these blockchains were designed the way they were, to focus so that your applications can be more secure, so that they can be more decentralized, so that you know nobody's exploiting it. And the criteria even for blockchain surviving is that there are people using them and finding that there's value in them. So with that, thank you so much to all of our panelists and for answering all these questions and for staying this time. I know we ran a little bit over time. Please give them a huge round of applause. Thank you, Diego. Thank you. So, yes, thanks Calvin, Yao-Chi, and Diego. Stephen, can I ask you to stay for a little while? Yeah, it's okay. So let me just put it on for you and a quick introduction. So Stephen actually flew all the way in from San Francisco or New York?
Well, no, this time I flew in from Tokyo.
Tokyo, okay. Yes. Yes. So flew in all the way, and we actually have to thank him greatly tonight for sponsoring the event. So it wouldn't have happened without the help of Stephen. And we'd like to spend the next 45 minutes or so for Stephen to go more in-depth in a keynote session to share more about Taraxa and the scalability solutions, as well as some case studies. And we'll have a bit of Q&A in the end, and you can also catch the other speakers after the event, right? So over to you, Stephen, and thank you, Diego. I'm gonna switch over now.
Okay.
Bye-bye.